is Hukla, and all the names that I carry are bird names. When I was given those names, each one I was given a story and a teaching that goes with them. So the story of my name of Hukla was given to me by the old ladies in my community at Splatching. I just realized that I'm supposed to be timing myself. So excuse me while I do that. So, and these women in my community observed me for 10 years before they gave me a name because they had not seen me since I was a child. So the name that they gave me is Hukla, and it means meadowlark. That's the English translation. And this is the bird in our stories that I'm told flies all over the territory. And she comes back and she lets everybody know what she has seen in a very loud voice. And she's not afraid to talk about anything. So that's the story of that name. So that's the name that I have in my signature at my job at SFU. The other two names are also bird names, but I'm not going to tell you those stories. I just wanted to illustrate that each name has a story and a teaching that is given with it. And so I bring you greetings from my family and my community. And I need to thank the spirits of these lands and the peoples of these lands. I acknowledge that I live, work, and play on the unceded, traditional, and occupied territories of my Coast Salish cousins, the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, the Musqueam, the Katzie, and the other Coast Salish people, where all the campuses sit from this house of learning known as Simon Fraser University. I would like to just begin with a prayer and ask that the spirits of these lands welcome us, embrace us, and from whichever territory that you're zooming in from, that the spirits of those lands also come and work with us here, that our ancestors come and sit with us in this dialogue, and give thanks to the keepers of the four directions and those above and those below to help bring us here with a good heart, a good mind, and a good spirit, to engage in a good way in what can be sometimes painful for us to talk about. I pray that this dialogue is blessed with dignity. And just a short story about my connection to this book. The chapter that I have in here is about my writing process in academia. When I finished writing my MA thesis, which I did here at the School of Communications at Simon Fraser, I finished the first draft and I was prepared to quit my program. I met with my committee and I explained that I had to really consider and think about, would I be able to stand up in global indigenous country with this thesis I had just written and be proud of it? And the answer was no. And I was not going to allow this document to go out into the world with my name on it. So I said that I was prepared to quit my master's program at that point. And so the women who were on my committee said to me, because they knew my work in visual storytelling, in the work that I did in film and television, and they both said, "You are a storyteller, Dorothy, And the stories are just underneath everything that you're saying and all these very theoretically, scholarly written chapters. So after I had that meeting with them, I went home and I totally revamped my writing process. And I came completely from an Indigenous perspective. I wrote in a holistic worldview. I wrote in 4 voices, different fonts, right margin, left margin, um, centered some of it. And it was the 4 voices of the heart, body, mind, and spirit. And I gave all those different voices places, and I said that they were synthesized by the silent voice of the heart, because that was the voice that had the emotion to enable me to write in this way. And when I gave myself permission to do that, I had just read Dr. Joanne Archibald's book, Indigenous Story Work, and Educating the Heart, Body, Mind, and Spirit. And when I sat down to do my draft 2 of my thesis, it just poured out of me. And it felt like I was almost not there. And all these stories came out, and my theoretical arguments and conceptualizing of an Indigenous theory all came together. And so I wanted to tell that story to both graduate students who sometimes get stuck in the writing process. And I know that for many of us, we are the first generation into this very colonial education system. So my job nowadays is as Associate Director of Indigenous Policy and Pedagogy in the Graduate and Doctoral Studies area at SFU. I get to work directly with MA and PhD students. So I'm helping them to navigate these corridors of power. And I mean, we have to deal with some truths and realities, and that the system is very colonial and it operates on white supremacist ideology. And I know that polite conversation doesn't like to use those words, but sometimes I can be very impolite, given some of my company. I think that for me as an Indigenous woman and for people of color, scholars, it is really difficult for us because of the hierarchy of race that exists in these institutions. And of course, the pinnacle of power is always the white, and we are relegated to something always below that. And I see that we are in a process of change and transformation. And that's what I see this book as, that it's a tool that's going to give faculty and department chairs and fellow grad students information on how it was we all navigated this system in order for us to get through it. So we need to learn how to do that for ourselves. In my chapter, I talk about indigenizing the writing process for myself. And what that meant was I privileged an Indigenous research paradigm, and I privileged Indigenous knowledge systems. So that gives you the my tie to the book. So that's what my chapter is about how I navigated all of that. So I'm way ahead of my time here, so I'm going to just launch into the next step of it because I really don't have anything more to say. I'll be open to questions at the end if if people need to know more. And so with the logistics, throughout this time, I'm going to be keeping time for everyone. So I will send the speakers a signal on your private chat message area to let you know when it is 1 minute before your time is up. And for everyone here, please keep your mic muted. You're welcome to have your camera on. And please note that the event is being recorded and it will be posted on YouTube. And for the Q&A, share your questions, your comments in the chat, and we will try to get through as many of those as possible. And Dr. Benita Bunjun will be managing those Q&A questions. And we would like to also just acknowledge our sponsors, Simon Fraser University Grad and Postdoctoral Studies here at the university, and the Department of Sociology and Anthropology here also at SFU, and Fernwood Publishing, in collaboration with the Vancouver Status of Women and the Racialized Students Academic Network. Now, there is a 20% discount being offered for the book by Fernwood Publishing, and the code is AWRS20, and that's available until October 31st next 2022. So all the royalties from this book will go to the Racialized Students Academic Network. So now it's time for me to introduce the panelists. And I really feel like this is way too much of my voice. I don't usually speak this much. So the first person I would like to introduce is Dr. Benita Bunjun. She is an associate professor in the Department of Social Justice and Community Studies and Women and Gender Studies in Kichipuktuk, Mi'kmaq. I'm sure I really messed that up, but in Mi'kmaq Territory in Halifax, Nova Scotia. She is currently a visiting faculty at SFU in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology. Her research examines organizational and institutional power relations with a focus on colonial encounters and nation building within academic spaces and workplaces. She received her PhD in interdisciplinary studies at the University of BC and on Coast Salish Territories, and completed a postdoctoral fellowship at SFU with the Center for Gender, Social Inequities, and Mental Health. She is currently the faculty coordinator for the Racialized Students Academic Network and works with racialized students and international students at various universities to promote their scholarship, well-being, and self-advocacy in the areas of academia, tenancy, and mental health. The next person, Benita, can you just put Vanessa up on screen rather than me, please? Vanessa Mitchell is an Okanagan Silks woman whose MA graduate research from UBC is focused on situating cultural safety to place through a Silks analytical framework using Indigenous methodology. She developed Journey to Aboriginal Cultural Safety and Humility program at Interior Health. Vanessa advocates for meaningful ways to address the immense inequities that Indigenous peoples experience. She begins her PhD this fall at the University of Northern BC. Yay, Vanessa. And the next person is Zane Mason Megji. I'm sure I've said that wrong. Vanessa, can you put Mason up on screen, please. He has a Bachelor of Social Work from Nicola Valley Institute of Technology. He identifies as a proud transgender man, Ismaili Muslim, and living with chronic illness. Currently living on unceded Coast Salish territories, he's been writing since he could hold a pen. Zane/Mason uses poetry to reflect on his daily life and strongly believes that poetry is a form of transformative social justice. He loves painting and baking and is passionate about community organizations and healing. Sorry, my thing is going off. Zane Mason is a passionate child and youth care worker who is also a dog papa to a lovely rescue dog named Milo. And we got to meet Milo earlier. And Natalie, if you can put Natalie up, Natalie Lozanzo Neidra, I'm sure I'm getting that wrong, came as a refugee from Colombia 22 years ago to Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish territories. She's been engaged in migrant justice work as a facilitator, youth worker, and community member. Natalie completed her MA in Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies at SFU, where she focused on the well-being of racialized community workers and settler Indigenous relationships, and will begin her PhD at the Social Justice Institute at UBC this fall. So that is all of our panelists. So I am reading here on our program that I will keep time from here on in. We've gone a little bit over time. So Benita will have 15 minutes, and then Fisan Thibault 5 minutes, and Vanessa 10 minutes, Zane 10 minutes, and Natalie 10 minutes. So Benita, you are on.
Thank you so much, Dorothy Christian, for just always being there and being present in so many ways. I'm very grateful to be here on Coast Salish territories. I want to also give thanks to the Indigenous Studies Department, who has allowed me to use one of their classrooms today at Simon Fraser University, and lots of reflections on the presence of Indigenous students, scholarship, staff, across different universities as I move across different universities. I want to also acknowledge all my elders who have supported me over the years. I want to acknowledge Betsy Bruyere, I want to acknowledge Yvonne Brown, Barbara Binns, Noga, many, many mentors who have been part of this story. The book is about all our relations, and it's a reflection of many, many learnings, but also a lot of the struggles. So for this book, this book really comes out from a number of conferences and papers presented by racialized students, Black, Indigenous students of color, at conferences or panels, and where I have some sort of involvement around mentorship or as a teacher. And there are also intellectual collaborations with peers like Dorothy Christian and Vanessa. And many of our relationships have shifted over time. And at times it started as students, but now it's more as colleagues. But the important part is that they continue, and they also continue outside academia. And that's a really big ingredient to this. So this collection includes art, photographs, poems, spoken word, thesis chapters, and academic papers from those that dare to create hybridized transformative spaces of good relations, knowledge creation, and community building. And for many of the networks, the student networks that I have supported, these are really pivotal gathering spaces that are critical and rare. And they ensure that students, and I want to also extend a gratitude here, because there are many people on the call who are elementary school, high school teachers who are going back in September, and who are youth workers also, like Mason, and to acknowledge that learning that happens in different spaces. But this is a space where students can further develop their own journey and theoretical visioning based on their multiple identities, histories, and struggles, and to also be able to do that in a collective way. So this collection is one of the first that has existed from Mi'kmaq, but also Coast Salish territories and the Okanagan. And the Okanagan was a place that I taught very early on. I want to just define for you the word academic well-being. I had to think a lot about what does that word really mean? And this is what I came up with. It's the capacity of academic institutions to carefully conceptualize and implement with relevance the policies, pedagogies, curricula, and services that promote the mental, physical, intellectual wellness of students. Further, it is when academic institutions fail to build and deliver on this capacity that students search for spaces of comfort, mentorship, resistance, networking, and survival to promote their individual and collective well-being. So in this book, I focus on the academic well-being of racialized students across three intersecting themes: barriers to academic well-being, acts of resilience and resistance to white supremacy within academia and school systems, and the nurturance of reciprocity, care, and kinship. Everyone that this was not a cold call edited book. This book came about through all the relations I had built over the years. And you will see today also how those relations have a life of their own, and how different people are actually connected to each other in this book. So I first met each of the contributors as students living in their complex lives, informed by historical, geopolitical, ancestral, collective, and individual landscape. I affirm that their act of writing in this book is itself a multifaceted moment of hybridized individual and collective academic well-being that is full of courage / of rage, and situated in transnational kinship relations. And the last chapter, which Dr. Yvonne Brown and I wrote, was really to look at this idea of transnational kinship relations, which we define as the encountering of individuals from across the globe and the making of non-blood kin relations due to struggles and experiences of otherness and outsiderness, as well as through collective resistance and survival. And one of the things that Dr. Brown and I had to think through, we've known each other for 25 years. She was also my teacher. I want to acknowledge that she taught the first course on Black women in the Americas at the University of British Columbia, Mi'kmaq Territory, where I was one of her students in that class. I think that the power of our relations with each other, all of us right now on this Zoom call, this is a place of encountering right now, that many, many years later, I think it was a little painful for her, but she and I gathered ourselves again 2 years ago and created a course similar but different on called Forms of Servitude. And so here was this very active academic and scholar who had retired. I pulled her out from somewhere, and she's still very resentful at this. Are you hearing me, Yvonne Brown? And we taught a course together, and we were able to model something very important. And someone like Fisan, who's on the call right now, attended one of those classes. And I think it's really important to be able to model that, especially to young people. I want to just read one quote from the book, and then I want to pass it on to a special guest who is Fisan, who I've asked to read a poem, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But throughout the years, and I want to draw on RAGA here, the Center for Race, Autobiography, Gender, and Age, which was at UBC. In all the meetings we had, including myself, and Dorothy was at a few of those meetings as graduate students, a group of students wrote, "Due to the lack of diversity of racialized critical scholars, we find ourselves gravitating towards the few that exist. We are troubled by having to demand more from already marginalized faculty who themselves experience racism within their departments and classrooms. We are further disappointed when non-racialized faculty are the ones teaching the few critical race courses on our campus. These courses are often relegated as special topics and are only offered every 3 to 5 years. For many of us who came to UBC as graduate students with the hope of taking such courses with critical Indigenous scholars and scholars of color, we have been gravely misled. This also has resulted in the lack of scholarly mentorship and pedagogies necessary for our successful completion of our masters and PhDs. So I just want to leave you with that. And I want to give lots of space for the other contributors to share what they would like to share. And right now I want to introduce one of my current students, who is Fisan. So Fisan is a SJCS, Social Justice and Community Studies undergraduate student who's also studying psychology. She's originally from Ethiopia, and she's an international student who is also the coordinator of the Racialized Students Academic Network. So Fisan, tell your story, my dear.
Thank you, Benita. I'd just like to acknowledge that my poem came from a workshop that Mason, who was here with us, did on spoken word. So thank you, Mason, and thank you, Benita, for organizing that. It's pushed me to be a better writer and just pursue more of who I am. So I appreciate that. So as an African international student at St. Mary's University, I'm deeply troubled by what I see every day in relations to how racialized international students engage in the most precarious employment in the city, which is predominantly invisible due to lack of choice. This invisibility results in Canada, the province of Nova Scotia, and the city of Halifax to use and abuse such labor which ultimately has devastating effects on the students' academic, physical, and emotional well-being, as well as their families. So this is what my poem is about. It's titled "The Unaddressed Precarity of International Racialized Students." Here I am speaking, but does my voice really matter? Employee, they say, not jobless, they say, lucky, they say, you should be grateful, but they don't see our precarity. They don't see our daily strive because they don't want to see. To be seen is to be an inconvenience. All they want to see is the profit. All they care about is pure selfish gain, while we labor for the city, Halifax. Day in and day out, delivery boy, server girl, retail man, home care worker, told that we are blessed to have these jobs, told that we must silently endure these painful conditions. We are your security guards at IKEA. We take your orders at McDonald's. We feed you. We deliver your food. Our labor carries universities. We are international students. Keep that smile on your face. Keep those tips and checks coming in. Just one more month, one more day, just one more shift, one more hour. These are the words we have to keep telling ourselves to survive. But we are tired. We're tired of being silent. We're tired of our labor being disrespected and devalued. We are tired of being disposable. Do they wonder who we are, the complexities of where we come from? Why do they refuse to acknowledge the discrimination in a country that calls itself inclusive? Our lack of Canadian citizenship means labor violations, employer-customer violence, anti-Black racist relations. In a land that isn't our own, on Mi'kmaq, our labor is harvested one day and thrown away the next. The constant discrimination and disrespect have almost cost us our health. They've almost cost us our lives, and some have been taken away from us. It is a physical and mental fight to be in such abusive environments. We constantly ask if it's worth it. You may ask, is it worth it? But what choice do we have? It is for our families back home. It's so that they don't die trying to sustain us in countries where currencies dictate our lives and well-being. This is how Canada, a white settler society, treats its international students. This is what we have to live with, and this is why I am choosing to speak up for us today, demanding that we be heard and that our voices and labor matters. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fison, for joining us. I know it's 10:36 in Mi'kmaq, and we look forward to you wrapping up your degree, and we thank you for your work with the Racialized Students Academic Network. And I'll pass it on to Vanessa, and then it will be Mason, and then Natalie.
Hi there. I'm joining from my home community of Mi'kmaq within the Coast Territories. You know, putting a lot of thought into the words that I wanted to share and the chapter that I contributed and where I am today in relation to that work, it really centers around the title, actually. It is in the past, get over it. Is it in the past? I chose that title because every time I hear it and every time I've heard it, it just lands on my body. And I need time to process it so that I can articulate why it lands on my body. Because it's not a phrase said out of love or empathy. It's often used to silence, dismiss, void, deny, and minimize. And it's a continued narrative rooted in colonization. And for those who may not know, this is something that gets said specifically to Indigenous peoples in these lands called Canada around their traumas and the violence and the genocide, ultimately, that has happened on these lands called Canada. And so I wanted to center the chapter that was shared and was asked of me to share on that, so that it could be a little bit of unpacking why this term is harmful. And you can hear it in any setting and in any institution. And one of the things I think about, you know, as I was reading through again the chapter that I contributed here, the burden of proof. You know, it's important for us to recognize that this continues to be true. The burden of truth and burden of proof of Indigenous title and rights, right down to my Indianness. And I'm going to use that term because it's connected directly to the Indian Act. There's an expiry date on my Indianness based on the status card and the protocols that Indian Act asked me to abide by. And when we connect all these dots with the colonization and burden of proof, it's important for us to know that history, because that colonial history is the colonial narrative today. And it's a way for us to understand. And so as again, I was reading through my contribution, you know the terminology. There are many different terms created on what to call me, what to call us as Indigenous people. So knowing your terms, the importance of knowing terms when we're living in these lands many call Canada, and important to know whose territories we are on. And so when I think about that in relation to research and you know, the journey of academia, ownership, control, access, and possession. There are there are requirements that I need to navigate as a student of academia, of the academy, and my commitment to community, nation, and my family. And leveraging these relationships and kinships is not an option. I've heard that, you know, in my journey of somebody working with Indigenous peoples for a short amount of time, feeling that they could leverage that relationship, and me needing to feel that on my body, intellectualize it so that I could articulate that. The harm behind that is thinking of, you know, I'm this age I am right now. I've been building these relationships my entire life. So leveraging these relationships and kinships is not an option. And, you know, when we think about, again, research and well-being, the importance to bring story and community into my research, you know, in that concentric circle, me, family, community, nation, the land, respect, relevance, reciprocity, responsibility that I carry and I hold, and what my writing was speaking to. And institutions are learners in understanding protocols and relationships, and what it truly is for students to uphold and maintain their integrity, ethic, and good relations. Because for me, community ethics supersedes university ethics. I still have to abide by university ethics, but to me, it's knowing that I'm keeping good relations. So the importance of time, you know, I write about that, and I reflect upon that a lot, and I try to dismantle that in the work that I do for people. And time is often dismissed or rushed, and the need to take time is so important to the relationship. And I think the other thing too is there's this lack of recognition that even a short amount of time can hold good relations within it. And I've done a lot of work within the healthcare system, so I think of it in that way. But, you know, the same is true within academia and within research. Taking that time and that connection. And the reporting back, you know, in history, the history of research, as we know, it has been harmful to Indigenous peoples. And so the reporting back is so important, and taking that time to gather information, have the talking circles, come together, share the stories, recognizing that the sharing of stories, some of it is just for me, and some of it is for the circle, and some of it is for the thesis. There's very distinct pieces, and being mindful of that. And so reporting back is so important because people want to know where their words went and that they were heard in the way that they can see themselves reflected in there. And one of the other things I felt compelled to write about was trauma and loss in community. You know, trauma and loss, everything stops. And the impact to a student or a researcher or a student researcher and their studies and research. You know, kinship ties are so vast and not limited to a nuclear family. And I think of within well-being and wellness and, you know, of students, bereavements do not align with end-of-life ceremonies within Indigenous communities. So there's these continued barriers that we face. And I know we're not alone in facing that. You know, there's often just the nuclear family as a model, and not maybe recognizing even families that we choose, that we might not have been born into, depending on, you know, our situation. So again, just really thinking of the writing that was contributed and reflecting on that again, and seeing what words I needed to share. You know, validity and legitimacy was certainly something that I had to process a lot and really unpack. You know, always the burden of proof for validity for Indigenous knowledge within academia, because it's so much centered on this Western knowledge that there's this comparison piece. And so how do we decentralize Western and center who we are and where we come from in the stories, and uphold that validity and legitimacy of those stories in a good way. And, you know, one of the things as I think about academic well-being of racialized students in this contribution and this work, and especially right now as I'm about to enter into another phase of academia, the importance to never lose heart. You know, I call this work hard work and heart work, the work of cultural safety that I'm involved in, or even this research. Hard work because of the resistance and the racism I can experience, and heart work that I'm doing this for myself, my children, my family, my community, my nation, and the land. So if I lose my footing or my way, I risk forfeiting my commitment to community. So fighting to keep my heart and mind connected and staying with my people at the forefront, and that resistance, you know, resist acquiescing. Those are a lot of things that are happening as we're trying to get the good grades, and as we're trying to write, and as we're trying to center our knowledge systems. And the importance of that, and the support needed for that, and how we create our circles and our spheres of safety within institutions as we go through these very, very intense journeys. I definitely consider it as a healing journey on so many levels. So where I am now, I carry on with cultural safety education and training. I strive to create safe space, whether it's debriefing, opening prayer, mindfulness, coming together, allowing people to share their voices, and keeping the fire in my belly. I have and continue to advocate for equity, fairness, and justice, even when it contravenes or is in opposition of leadership, as it only serves to contribute to both the advancement of a system or a space and the reduction of harm. And I'll close with saying, I'm entering into the doctoral program and I continue the work. My working thesis is stepping into the role of auntie, using stories and place-based knowledge to understand how to foster Indigenous strength and wellness in the face of settler colonial demands about cultural safety and humility. Thank you so much, and it's always been a privilege to be a part of this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa. Okay, the next person up is Zane / Mason.
Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So I'm gonna like talk a bit, but then I'm also gonna do some poetry reading. So one of the things that brought me to this book was that in 2014, a friend of mine and I facilitated a spoken word workshop at the conference, and we engaged in some really good dialogues. And I always like think about it in the racial justice work that I do now. And like at that time, I remember like I actually was leaving to get top surgery on that day. So I like came to the conference to like facilitate with my friend, and then she like dropped me to the airport so I could go to Toronto and get top surgery. And so I think I was really coming into myself at that time as well. And when Vanessa was talking about kinship ties, it made me think a lot about my BIPOC queer chosen family who looked after me when I was going through top surgery, and how I honestly wouldn't have made it without them. And I'm such a stubborn person to take care of. So like I didn't take my pain medication because I was like, I'll be fine. And then I was like, oh wow, I really do need a Tylenol 3 at like 4 a.m, you know? And so I think for me, we learn so much when the body slows down. And yeah, I just wanted to say where I was when I wrote it. And so I'll read an excerpt of a poem I wrote that's in it. And let me know about timing, because I'm like really bad with that as a facilitator. So I always have a little like clock beside me. So this one is called Muslim Boys and Haircuts. When Bilal trims my hair at the salon that is open until midnight on the corner of Al-Fahidi, I wonder who gifted him with his soft magic hands that make my heart feel so at ease. The beautiful thing about being surrounded by brown people is that when they ask me where I am from, I feel more at home than I have ever felt. He tells me he is from Dili, and I ask him what he misses the most. He says, everything. There is no place like home. And I wonder if the ache for home in my chest will ever be at ease. And I do not think it will, but I can work on getting closer. And when I wrote that poem, I was traveling in India with my family, and I had never felt so relaxed at a haircut place in my life. All of these like brown Muslim, like sweet guys were like cutting hair at like midnight on the corner of the street. And like having chai and like speaking in their language. And it honestly felt like I was like walking into one of my auntie's houses. And so where I am now is that when I wrote this chapter in the book, I was in my old living situation one house ago. And so now I'm in a different apartment. So I'm in a different like location physically. I got my sweet rescue dog who's behind me named Milo, who's asleep. I've been spending a lot of time in nature, swimming in a lot of oceans and rivers, like, and listening to the sound of the waves and the sound of the rocks. And I also wrote a little poem about something I went through that had to do with race. And so I'm healing, I'm not going to get into it, but I'm healing from a hate crime, and I'm recovering from a hate crime that happened in public. So a lot of what I'm doing now is like reclaiming the body as mine, and telling stories, and trying to also teach the youth I work with that adults can work through their traumas and talk about them, so that they see that adults can talk about what's going on with them and heal through things. And so this is a poem called A Number of Things I Hang On to After the Hate Crime. Number 1, my brown and BIPOC chosen family, opening up their hearts to hold space for me, showing up in ways I did not expect. Celebrating being alive. Number 2, celebrating being alive for my 31st birthday, when a week ago I thought I may not have made it. 3, the sound of Milo sleepily dragging her paw to walk to the water bowl at night, and listening to her as she takes a few gulps. 4, friends showering me in beautiful bouquets, because they know how romantic I am. Number 5, on a whim, I try to believe in love again, so I go on a date with my nose cast on. The boy I go on a date on has such gorgeous eyes, they are heart melting. I stand still and time stops. I think maybe this man could be something special. 7, recovering from this is always possible, even on days I do not believe that it is. Number 8, the sound of Vedder River thrashing and crashing along the rocks, my feet dipping and kissing the sand and the water, perfect for a cool down on a hot summer day. Number 8, my friend's toddler telling me my owie looked bad, and him giving me a hug that I'm sure healed thousands of wounds and generations in me. He is a brown boy who cannot understand why white people beat brown people, so instead he tells me he loves me. I hope we are on to a better world, he says. I love him. So that's a poem I wrote after what happened. And so a lot of the work that I'm doing right now is I'm going to therapy. I'm doing a lot of somatic therapy for myself to heal. And I'm also, I have a concussion, so I'm also doing a lot of slowing down right now. And I'm very committed to the children and youth I work with. And so I'm starting back on September 6th. And so in that time in my life, I actually today, to like get into the mood, I was trying to channel the children who teach me the best lessons. Everyone asks me who teaches me, and it's all of these children. There are no words to describe. They teach me the best lessons, and the elders, they teach me the best lessons. And so I made like a big sign in like sparkly letters that said Mr. Mason, just to put on my door, and I got like a little calendar, and I am channeling the little child in me, and I think that's such an important thing to do. And I feel really lucky to be here with all of you. And thank you so much for all your hard work. And I'm so excited to see those kids on their first day of kindergarten and work with them. And have a lot of love in my heart, and I'm very grateful for all of you. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you, Mason. That was great to hear about and to know all of the things that you've been navigating through this place that we live and work and play on. Okay, so the next person is Natalie.
Thanks, Dorothy, and thank you everyone else for what you've shared. I think I've been thinking a lot about what I was going to say today, and nothing of what I prepare is what I will do. But I think that's the nature of this book and the nature of us being in academia, of putting ourselves as part of the work. And that's not like we hear often in academia, I hear often in academia that we're supposed to separate our feelings and who we are from the writing and from the academic work, because then it's biased. And then I speak a lot about it in my chapter around bias for whom and what does that mean? Because for many, since institutions, academic institutions were created, it's been white men, heterosexual men mainly, and then white women entering our communities and doing research with our communities, claiming to be unbiased because they had a perspective that no one else saw, and then not seeing the kind of damage that did to our communities. And that is the reason I decided to enter academia and decided to do my master's degree. I was part of refugee community in Coast Salish territories, in Musqueam territory, Tsleil-Waututh and Squamish territory, and we were like the hot topic of for a few years, where all the researchers wanted to come and do research on refugee youth, and there were numerous things, I think, written about us. We participated in so much research, but we never saw the outcomes. Nothing was ever connected back to us. We don't know what happened. And what I did know is that whenever they left, we were heartbroken. We had to deal with the trauma. We had to deal with all the things that came up from sharing our stories. And then we never heard back about, like, the research was never useful for our community. So I entered the institution with some hesitation, but also thinking that there must be a different way of doing it. And so I joined the Gender Studies Department at SFU. And there were some things that were a little bit different, that taught me to think a little bit different about the colonizing methodologies, or thinking about Canada as a settler state, and about me and my experience as being a refugee when navigating research. But I think ultimately my graduate degree failed me, and I don't think it's unique to the program. I think it's unique to the institutions. Like, all the institutions are meant to make me feel like a failure, like I didn't fit in, like I wasn't supposed to be there. And so in my chapter, I talk a lot about the trauma and the effect on my wellness, like physically, and in things that never manifested before. Like, I had never had a panic attack until I went to grad school. And then I was at a meeting with Benita, who took me to the ER because I felt like I was having a heart attack, and I didn't know. And it took many tries of going to the ER to realize that it was a panic attack what I was having. And all of these, like, health expressions were sparked by being in academia. And I get a little emotional because I've had a rough day, but I've had a rough week because I just left my homeland to go back to UBC to go to school. And so it sparks so many emotions. Of course, I'm living in a different way than when I left as a refugee many years ago. But I'm also thinking so much as I was reflecting on what I was going to say today about what it means to go back to academia, and am I ready to put myself through that again? And I was reminded by Benita today that I'm not doing it alone, and I'm not coming back by myself. And I think that's a key difference in my experience, in realizing that I'm not alone, but also that I'm there to be there also for other racialized and indigenous folks and students who are at different levels, undergrad, grad, because we're made to feel that we are not supposed to be there. We are also made to feel like we should be alone and we should be isolated and no one else understands us, but there's so many of us now. And so it is thanks to all these aunties that are on this call today, and that we keep reading about and theorizing about, that have given us kind of the ground to like ground ourselves in, and to like put our feet on the land, to realize that our stories do matter, that our communities do matter, that we are worth, aunties, yes, that we are worth the effort that it takes to go through a research project. Because I think I'm reflecting a little bit on what the speakers before me said around, we are not entering academia to follow the ethics of the university. Yes, that's something we have to do to be able to get through the program, but there is so much more that needs to go into when we're doing research with our communities, with our peers, in solidarity with other communities. And so there are academic hurdles and colonial hurdles that we have to overcome, but there is so much work and so much beauty also in the kinds of learnings that have happened to me because of being able to talk, to be part of the academic well-being of racialized students school, really, that Benita created, of talking to other racialized and indigenous scholars and students. And so I think that's, for me, as I'm trying to return, where I'm trying to focus on all the beautiful learnings that I'm also gonna have, and not just on the negative stuff. And I wanted to close my contribution with something that I wrote towards the end of the chapter. So rather than adapting our ways of being, thinking, and working to fit white academia, we must continue questioning, critiquing, and creating discomfort in the systems and people who for years studied us and claim to be experts of our experiences. Those people who boasted at being unbiased because they could not see the role they played in our oppression. It is time to let our own biases pour all over our work, to infiltrate the tower, to center our voices and histories, to be meaningful allies to each other, and to ground our work in dismantling the systems created to make sure we did not survive. That's all I had to share. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And just remember that tears are healing, Natalie. It's perfectly fine to allow your heart to feel. All right, Dr. Benita, I will turn it over to you, my dear.
Thank you so much, Dorothy, Christian, Vanessa, Mitchell, Mason, Zane, Meji, Natalie, Lozano Nera. Thank you so much for embarking on this journey. The book, that's a whole other story of how we work with young people to give the encouragement and guidance to turn a piece into a writing that can then be published. That's a whole other level of engagement, and I want to really acknowledge Fazila from Fernwood Publishing. When you're working with a publisher who understands your relationships with the contributors, it really is a huge support. And the work that Fernwood Publishing is not an academic publisher according to the institutions of white academia, but it is producing the most nuanced writing by Indigenous, Black, and racialized scholars and trans scholars. And I want to really give a shout out to Fernwood